This week on the People Property Place podcast, we are throwing it right back to July 2023 when I sat down with Jess Piltz, Head of Sustainable Investing, Private Markets at Fiera Capital and Fiera Real Estate UK. I had a wonderful conversation with Jess where we spoke about how she got into real estate, her early career moves, what the opportunities are if you are considering pursuing a career within the ESG space, what traits she looks for when hiring, green hushing, social hushing and the anti-ESG movement, natural carbon, her dream to make her role redundant, and so much more. So if you liked this podcast, do drop me a DM to say hi. I love seeing who is listening to it. And also do me a favour by sharing it with a friend or colleague. It is so appreciated. Have a good week wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Welcome to the People Property Place podcast. Today we're joined by Jess Piltz, Head of Sustainable Investing, Private Markets at Fiera Capital. Fiera Real Estate is wholly owned by Fiera Capital Corporation, a leading independent global asset management firm with more than $121 billion of assets under management as of the 31st of March 2023. Jess is responsible for leading Fiera Capital's global sustainable investing strategy across private markets, alongside and working closely with asset class specialists in each strategy to ensure a consistent, purpose-led and proactive approach to ESG considerations. Jess, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Not at all. Well, I feel like I've got so much I need to learn about this subject. So I'm really excited about delving in to a little bit about your background and how you see the market. But a place that I always like to start with these conversations is really trying to understand why and how did you get into real estate?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So growing up in Cape Town, so I'm from South Africa, hence the accent. Growing up in Cape Town, my parents told me that I had to do a business degree, and I really wanted to do interior design, and they said, no, get a business degree first. So I was like, what is the closest thing to interior design? So I was like, property. So I went to study property economics or real estate investment at the University of Cape Town for 4 years, got my undergrad and then honours, which is I think the equivalent of your master's here. And I was so overstudying at that point that I just went straight into the industry. And yeah, in my final year, so on my thesis, I did on green buildings back in like 2008 or whatever it was, so really ahead of its time. And then I got sucked into the real estate industry.
So what prompted you to do green real estate at that time?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think at the time, when we were looking at thesis topics, it was such an emerging theme that was coming out. And I've always been passionate about the environment. So I think growing up in South Africa, surrounded by beauty, surrounded by social hardship, I think I was always passionate about that sort of alternative approach and that sort of, being painfully aware of how beautiful the planet is and actually that it was at, risk of being hurt or damaged. And at the time there was the UK Green Building Council was the UK one, and then we were starting a South African one. This South African Green Building Council was like made up of a couple of people, and I remember they formed a big part of my thesis, and it was like a really niche, interesting space. So I just sort of got into that and then went in directly into asset management, managing a portfolio of retail shopping centres in underserviced townships across South Africa. So I used to have bodyguards escort me to these properties because they were in such disadvantaged communities. And so that was a real eye-opener from a social impact point of view. It was actually a fund that was way ahead of its time now looking back. And I became sort of the green champion, or that's what it was called at the time, for the fund. And that's how I got sucked even more into sort of ESG. Did
the fund, you said it was ahead of its time, how much emphasis did it put on being green or sustainable or impact or ESG? Or was it just kind of a bit of an afterthought?
Well, it's so funny because I think at the time it didn't even realise it was called the Community Property Fund. So even the name of the fund suggests that it was like an impact fund back in the time. But I don't think it ever was intentionally, because that concept didn't really exist then. It was just, that was the fund. And I remember at the time we were signing up to do PRI and things like that. And that was a good, 13 more, like 14 years ago.
What's
looking
PRI?
at the Principles for Responsible Investment. So it's a United Nations backed sort of benchmarking tool that really allows investment managers, or asset owners, asset managers, they sign up, and it's sort of principles and recommendations that guide them to being more sort of responsible in the way that they in the way that they invest. And that was really long time ago that a company in South Africa was looking at PRI. So yeah, I think they were quite ahead of its time, but not intentionally so to have a competitive advantage. I think it was just the nature of the business.
Was it the business, or was it the nature of the capital backing the business that was driving it?
It was, well,
was it a bit of both?
I wish, but it was the company that I worked for. We managed some of the government's largest pension schemes. So it's probably a bit of both, but I think it was more the people working in the organization versus, I think at the time, the investors.
So you did that for a couple of years before moving to London.
Yeah.
It seems to be a bit of a well-trodden path going to Cape Town, University of Cape Town, doing property, and then moving over here. Why did you decide to make the move over here?
I'll be honest, I felt like South Africa was really far away from the rest of the world, and I really wanted to travel. So I selfishly came over because I really wanted to be closer to, get that experience. You're very far away in South Africa. It's a very different lifestyle, and I wanted to experience what it was like to live overseas, to travel. I also, at the time, sustainability, ESG, so many different names for it, was such a nascent space in South Africa. I was really keen to come over here because I saw more opportunity. It was much more advanced. So I actually moved over specifically for a role it was the IPD, Investment Property Data Bank, now Msci Real Estate.
And how did that come about? Did you manage to secure the role before you moved? Because I talked to a number of South Africans or Australians or people from the US, and it's always that balance between trying to tee up a role before you come.
Yeah.
Or come and then find the role.
Totally. So I did actually tee it up before. Funny story, I was meant to move to New York with my then boyfriend, now husband, and 2 weeks before we left, I got offered this job in London, and I was like, actually, you go to New York, I'll go to London. But the reason it came about is I worked really closely with IPD in South Africa at the time, just in terms of their analytics. And I became quite good friends with the people that sort of managed, we were their client, and they were our service provider, and we became quite good friends. And they actually mentioned that they were looking for someone in London to do this role. And that was about sort of 6 months before I actually even got offered the job, and I had the interviews, and then it's sort of just, they weren't sure if they were going to hire someone, so it sort of fizzled out. And then 2 weeks before I was meant to move to New York, they offered me the job. So I came over to London for the job, and actually that was the best decision I made. So yeah, just having those connections in the market with companies that are sort of, global really helped to sort of, that's why relationship building always important.
So what was your actual role at MSCI? What did you actually come in and do? Because it's probably a bit of a move away from being a real estate asset manager. It
was a bit of a move, but it was really good grounding. And what I will say is that I'm probably unique in that I am an ESG person, but with a commercial asset management background, which is sometimes quite hard to find. And that is very helpful for the people I work with, because it's important to not just be ESG focused. You have to find the balance, and you have to understand the commercials and not just be so sort of pigeonholed with ESG.
Because at the moment I'm seeing a lot in the market, asset managers who've got a lot of asset management experience. They're now getting
great.
Which is brilliant. They're trying to get the sustainability and ESG piece. Whereas I guess you had a small amount of asset management experience, but significantly more sustainability.
Yeah. Definitely. So I suppose I had that asset management experience, and then the role that I did at IPD was specifically on sustainability. So I came over to lead their sustainability initiatives, products, indices. I worked really closely with then a woman who sort of pioneered them, Christina Cudworth. She was amazing. She was a really great mentor for me, and I sort of ended up taking over like that part of her role. And it was, very much working with different markets. We set up a green French index, like a green building index. We set up one in Canada. There was one in New Zealand. We did a lot of work with EPCs in Europe, like Netherlands and Germany. And then probably what a lot of people in the market remember me for is a product called EcoPass, which we worked on with RICS, CBRE, like the valuation community. And it was intended to sort of provide asset managers with a look at how their portfolio compared to their peers from like an ESG point of view, looking at the financials and ESG alongside each other. So this was way ahead of its time. And so it took off, but it didn't really take off because I think it was just too early. And actually now the irony is that everyone's trying to do that. But yeah, I did that for a while, which was great. So I had that sort of analytical benchmarking experience too,
but also setting some early standards and trying to standardize it, build relationships across the market, and really try and trailblaze.
100%. So that experience it really defined my whole career, because I became really good friends and made really good connections with a lot of our clients. So the people that I'm still connected with today, the heads of sustainability at Aviva, BlackRock, M&G. We're still connected because of, I suppose, that experience, and that really grounded me in that space. And
would you say at the time that those individuals had the same altruistic drive or desire, or I guess their values were intrinsically linked to having impact and sustainability, and that's probably what drew them well ahead of the time to this particular space?
100%. And I'd say that there's a group of us which are almost like the original ESG people. And I think, I like to say that we did it long before it became cool. And 100%. I mean, we put in the hard yards and it paid off. But I think now it's being taken seriously. But even then, we'll get onto that, because even though it's taken seriously, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. But I think 100%, I think it'd be hard to find an ESG person that isn't deeply passionate about like the meaning behind it and why they got into it in the first place.
At that stage, who were the adopters, or who were the clients? Who was coming to you? Was it the funds? Was it the family offices? Was it the REITs?
Oh no,
the private equity businesses?
Institutional. So it was our primary clients for EcoPass at the time. It was then Standard Life, which is now obviously part of Aberdeen. It was Hermes, which is now Hermes Federated. It was M&G, which was Prupum at the time. So this is really going back. It was Aviva. I'm forgetting a big one, Henderson, which is now Nuveen. Yeah. So it was those types of clients that were really coming forward and really paving the way. And it's still them that, they obviously had a really big head start.
And why would you say it's more of the institutional grade clients that were seeking that, as opposed to maybe other types of real estate investors or developers?
I think it's a combination of, one, just the resourcing that they had, so both people resources and the financial backing. I also think they just had really good fund managers. The people that I worked with in those organizations were great people. I remember one of the guys at Prupum, or now M&G, he was a legend of the time, Paul McNamara, and almost everyone in the industry knows him, but he really championed this across loads of different platforms. So I think it was really like individuals in those organizations at the time, because those organizations had the foresight to hire those people, but then it was the people that really drove this forward. And a lot of them are still there today. So
you were with MSCI for kind of 2.5 years or so before you moved to GVA.
Yeah.
Why did you make that move, and how did that come about, and what was the...
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say, because I don't want to... let's just say that the culture changed at IPD, and I don't think sustainability at the time was viewed as a primary priority. And I really wanted to pursue that, and I didn't feel like that was the place for me to do that. And so I left for GVA and went into consultancy. Unfortunately, quite quickly realised that I'm not a consultant. I am much more of a doer, and I like to see things through. So it really pained me to tell people what I thought they should do and then not know if they were going to do it or not, and actually be a part of that delivery. And so I think it was a few months. I was only at GVA about a year, now Everson Young. But before the end, so it was about 3 months before I left, RBS approached me. Some people that I knew within the industry about a role within their commercial real estate credit team. So going on to like the lending side.
Yeah, it's interesting. In terms of the different pockets of experience that you've had and touched on. So move from asset management to kind of more of the index space, to consulting, to going more on the credit side.
Yeah, I've really covered it all, which is great. So I went to RBS. On the lending side. So looking at my role there was to set up environmental and sustainability risk processes within their lending due diligence. So basically, we would, when any loan proposition came through to us from a commercial real estate, whether it's a developer or, asset owner, whatever it was, we would look at whether we would create a set of criteria for them to go through and sort of thresholds as to whether that project that we were lending on or the property met those criteria before we would lend.
Is that from a risk perspective?
More from definitely from a risk perspective as a lender. So things like, the minimum energy efficiency standards. If we were lending on a property that was going to have like an F or G EPC rated building, that posed a risk for us. Or if it had, even environmental things at that time, like asbestos or land contamination or flood risk, things like that. So we would look at that and consider that within the sort of
the confines of the loan book.
Exactly.
and how you'd manage your risk.
Exactly.
And was that a relatively new role for?
Yeah, it was brand new. Yeah.
It was a brand new, fresh role.
I like to find those, yeah, because Fiera, I was also the first person, so I definitely am I like to
be a trailblazer.
Yeah, I like to have a blank canvas and come in and sort of create. I'm definitely like strategically focused.
So what was driving that new role? Was it RBS was looking to its competitors? Was it looking at actually manage risk? Was it best practice and this is what we should be doing? Was it part of a broader CSR strategy? Why did they want to create that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at the time it was quite, regulations were starting to come out. So there was a lot of regulation, like, the minimum energy efficiency standards were coming out, which said that you couldn't let an F or G EPC rated property. So I think a lot of it was like a bit of stick. So a lot of the regulatory sort of landscape was changing, and that we knew that was going to have an impact. But I think at the time it was sort of, and if I think back, that was around 2015, 2016, things were starting to, shake up a bit. And I think people were starting to be aware that this was going to become a big area and people were starting to think about it. But now when I look back, it still wasn't completely embedded and entrenched into what we're doing. It was still very much a tick box exercise. It was still, you need to be seen to be doing something, but whether or not people were, truly backing it was a different story. And I think that's true across the whole of the real estate industry. I don't feel like at that point we had kind of made the inroads that we have now.
Did you veto any loans, or were you involved? Were you part of any deals that didn't go? I'm just trying to understand, because you're saying people weren't necessarily taking it that seriously.
Yeah.
Was it kind of a lip service, not greenwash, but is it lip service? No, look, we've got this position in place, so we're looking like we're doing the right thing. No, but actually, did you create something that actually
definitely at that time?
Lending?
No, I get what you're saying. No, definitely at that time they were, because it was lending. It's a lot more. I suppose risky from that perspective. No, there were definitely loans that you wouldn't have done based on that criteria if they came back, and there was no ways that, obviously you would try work with the borrower to say, like, if you can improve it from this to this, or if you would always try find the solution. So you would say, okay, there's land contamination, that needs to be remediated, or flood risk is a bit harder to deal with, but we would always make sure, like, do you have insurance in place? So there was always like, if this then that. It wasn't always just a blank no. Yeah, and it's the same with tenants now. So they are tenants that we would look at not entering into a lease with purely based on their activity, as opposed to sort of the characteristics of the building, which we feel like we could probably change.
Interesting, because you were at Royal Bank of Scotland for 2.5 years or so. Did you see a marked difference from when you joined to when you left in terms of how serious people took this? And were there more people coming to you for advice, or were there more individuals kind of getting into the space, or is it still too early?
I'll be honest, I'll say no. I would say it didn't feel like it had changed then. It felt, obviously it had improved since when I first came to the UK in sort of 2010 or 2011 when it was, but I would say it hadn't got to where it is now. And actually that I fell pregnant while I was at Royal Bank of Scotland, and when I went on mat leave, I didn't think that I wouldn't not come back to work. That was always the plan. And then a few things sort of changed the course of why I didn't go back. And then I sort of swore I'd never go back to ESG and real estate ever again because I was so fatigued. And it felt like a constant battle. And I think I just lost a lot of my passion. I'm sitting here now, so obviously I changed my mind.
Yeah, I was gonna say, was it that time out, being a mother, did that give you space for reflection and actually a bit of time to think of, I've been trying to drive and push all these doors. A couple are opening, but definitely not at the rate that I would like them to. But staying in contact with maybe that earlier cohort of peers, did that have any bearing? Or
so? I mean, I can give you the honest answer of how I ended up coming back, because it's completely random. I had really bad postnatal depression with my second child. And so I ended up actually having a 3.5-year career break. And when so I had my son, and then when my daughter was 8 months, I remember calling my husband saying, I have to go back to work. I think it's the best phone call he's ever got in his life. But I was like, I need to go back to work. And I literally, kid you not, but about 2 days later got a call from a recruiter that I'd worked with in the past, who'd actually placed me at GBA. And he was like, any chance that you'd be willing to do a, part-time ESG role at an asset manager? And I was like, and I thought about it for a while, because I had obviously promised myself I'd never go back. And actually, before sort of agreeing to this, I looked at everything under the sun. I was like, how could I work for Jo Malone or Chanel or, a brand that I love and not go back into the space? And then I just spoke to loads of people in the market, my peers who I'd stayed in touch with, and they promised me that things had changed. And obviously I'd been keeping track the whole time while I was on mat leave. I could see that things had changed, but I sort of wanted to sense check that was the case. And so I kind of figured, also having children, and sort of that, the passion that I'd had beforehand, I suppose, actually intensified after having children, because I was like, I want to make sure that, I want my job to have purpose. If I'm going to leave them and not be at home with them, I want to know that I'm doing something purposeful and that's meaningful for them too,
for their future.
Exactly. So, yeah. And so I ended up going, and that was Fiera Real Estate. So I ended up going to work at Fiera Real Estate, and this was just before COVID. So I had my interviews in the January of 2020, and then in February, and then got offered the job. I think I had my last interview the day before lockdown or something ridiculous. And then I started my job in the May, and I only met my colleagues a year later.
So was that Palmer Capital at the time, or was it Fiera?
It had just sort of rebranded to Fiera Real Estate.
So for people listening to this, can you just give me a little bit of a background about that and that transition, and then we can come on to Fiera Capital, just so we can kind of draw the links for people who might not know.
Yeah, so Palmer Capital was founded by Ray Palmer, legend in the industry, and was a very well-known real estate asset management company. We also have a unique business model in that we are a shareholder in 9 different property companies, and that was really part of his, I suppose USP is that he found these amazing, young, talented developers and invested in their companies, and they've grown substantially and done really well. And then we were bought out by Fiera Real Estate. So Fiera Capital is our parent company, and there's both a public market side and a private market side. And on the private market side, we have exposure to real estate, agriculture, infrastructure, private credit, private equity, and soon timber. And Palmer Capital then formed or made up the real estate UK part of Fiera Capital. And then we also have Fiera Real Estate Canada. And that's how sort of Fiera Capital's grown their private markets business, is that they've bought sort of underlying businesses to sort of buy those different asset classes. So that was, I think it all happened in about 2018. So it was quite new when I came in, but I came into Fiera Real Estate, but it still had that very much family feel of Palmer Capital, which is really nice, and it's sort of held on to that to some extent.
So you'd moved back to the principal side
Yeah. Did full circle.
Full circle, not in an asset management role, but in a dedicated ESG role. Can you just let me know about your role there, and what was your mandate, or what was your job, and what was your kind of focus?
Sure. So I came in, there was no one, I was the first person that they hired from an ESG perspective. And my role was very much to grow the ESG brand within the business, to try get us to be recognized as a leading ESG asset manager. Not necessarily to be the leader, but to be seen amongst like the top quartile. And we have two parts of our business. So we now have three. We have debt too, but we had initially at the time just core and value add. So my role was very much to work with the fund managers, the investment teams, to build and integrate ESG into the way that we managed our funds. So that was a huge part. So going from sort of nothing to creating like a vision and a strategy, embedding it into everything from acquisitions to, quarterly ESG risk profiling, to investor reporting, to data, to, gathering the data. We had like none. Now we have 85%. So yeah, that was very much my role. And then a very small part of it was also to do the corporate side. So just looking at Fiera Real Estate's, corporate emissions, things like that, which we're on top of now. But yeah, the primary part of my role was very much investment focused. So how can we embed ESG truly into what we're doing? And very much a massive part of my role, and I tell anyone this, and it's really important when I'm hiring anyone, is relationship building, communication. I've always seen myself as almost like an internal consultant, because as much as ESG's grown, you still have to win respect, trust, approval. You have to get people on your side. The majority of the time now I work with amazing people, but there's still those few that you do have to sort of win over.
And convince.
Yeah, exactly.
Quick one from me. If you haven't already subscribed or followed this show on the podcast or app where you listen or watch, please do. It takes 10 seconds and helps tremendously. I've got really big plans for the People, Property, Place podcast, and that one small action really, really helps grow the show and the presence and enables us to keep doing what we're doing. So if you haven't already, please follow or like on the platform you watch or listen to. Thanks so much. And as well as working on the value add and then the core fund, you touched on the portfolio companies
Yes.
being an interesting, unique business model. Can you just expand on why is that unique, and also your role with those 9 different subsidiaries and how that may be varied as well?
I suppose it's unique in that we have direct access to deal flow. So it's been a really fundamental part of our sort of business. And I suppose it's success in that those property companies have deals that they're working on, projects, and a lot of those projects form part of our sort of value add our value add funds and potentially our core side. So we have unique access to deal flow. We don't necessarily have to go out to the market a lot of the time, so it's often a lot more straightforward. But also just working on amazing projects. So they've done some of the most market leading ESG projects, some in Bristol. So there was the Halo building in Bristol, which was phenomenal. We've done loads of projects across the whole of the UK that have just been exemplar from a sustainability point of view. And many of them are actually cheering us along and bringing us along because they're just so advanced in terms of like their net zero carbon construction and what they're doing. And then part of my role with them is to kind of support them, help them with their ESG policies. That was sort of in the beginning. Now it's really about like, how can we measure embodied carbon and doing life cycle carbon analyses on the projects that we're developing, offsetting, things like that. So that's an exciting part of the role.
Yeah, I guess because you can then be parachuted into whether it's Cubex or Packaged or Rembridge or Harleyford or whichever one it is, and give your advice. I know.
I'm really impressed.
It's my job to know these things. And for them, I guess they get the benefit of not a resource like you, but with your knowledge and your track record, rather than having to necessarily hire directly themselves.
Exactly.
But you can then, as you alluded to, pull the data, which is power, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so you did that for a few years, and then your role has changed further because it's now not just UK focused. How has your role changed and evolved to become a little bit more global, and what does that actually mean?
Sure. So initially, when I first joined Fiera, I was just responsible for the UK real estate team, and then as I suppose the business sort of grew globally, and we sort of became more connected, we felt that it would be a really good opportunity, because ESG is so universal, if I sort of looked after the Canadian portfolio too. So and because as a market, Canada's a bit further behind than the UK and Europe, it made sense for us to sort of share a lot of what we had done with them for them to pick it up. So I actually hired someone in Canada to sort of lead on the Canadian real estate side. And he sort of has adopted a lot of what we've done in the UK, but obviously also bearing in mind that the market is different there. He's sort of trailblazed, and he was the first hire from an ESG perspective in Canada. He's great. So he's sort of leading on that side in Canada. And then so that was after I'd been here when was that? Beginning of last year that happened. And then I got really involved on the private market side, sort of middle of the year. And I really enjoyed that. Just sitting, we set up a private markets ESG committee last year, which pulled people from all over the business, from sort of infrastructure, agriculture. And I really enjoyed that exposure. I think I've been in real estate for a really long time. I've kind of seen all the challenges, seen everything. So I was really keen to, just kind of get a feel for other asset classes, because I think real estate's really far advanced, despite what people may think. In comparison, like really far advanced from an ESG point of view. Infrastructure is like close behind, but I'd say it's definitely real estate's leading the way. And so in April of this year, my role broadened to sort of be head of sustainable investing for private markets. So that's really overseeing our vision from a sustainable investing point of view across the business, across private markets. But I have underlying amazing resources in each of those asset classes who sit within those individual strategies and report to the heads of those strategies. So in real estate, we've got, real estate Canada and a real estate UK person. Infrastructure, we've got amazing people, agriculture, timber, and then I'm overseeing sort of private credit and things like that. So it's really important to have those underlying specialists, and I'm sure the need's going to grow for more people at some point. But my role is really to just bring collaboration, because there's so much we can learn from each other. And we have so many amazing resources. I mean, our head of responsible investment for Fiera Comox, which is one of the underlying businesses, she's got a phenomenal experience. And has been in the space for nearly 30 years. So, I'm learning so much from her. So my role is really to bring about, resource sharing, collaboration, alignment. How can we integrate? How can we, use what we're doing in agriculture to support, our decarbonisation pathway in real estate from an offsetting point of view, using like soil carbon sequestration or something like that. So, it's exciting and overwhelming.
Couple of questions, but firstly, when would you say the kind of the switch flicked in terms of mass adoption, interest, need for ESG and sustainability to be like front and center from a real estate perspective?
I suppose there's a couple things. In 2018, the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, released, I think it was their 5th assessment, and it basically just highlighted how dire the situation was. I think that was quite a pivotal moment in time. Then we had a lot of regulations starting to come out. So, at the time was the minimum energy efficiency standards. Those regulations actually started kicking in from like 2020, now 2023. It was kind of, this is happening. And then I would say SFDR was a really big one. So the Sustainable Finance Disclosures Regulations in Europe. Really, as much as I really don't like them, and as much as they were not built for private markets, let alone real estate, which is one of the challenges that we face, I'd say that they were really key in pushing this dialogue forward and getting everyone to start thinking about it. But I think it's mainly just more general awareness of the urgency of the situation in the last couple of years. And then from that, investor pressure, mega investor pressure.
And would you say there's a particular type of investor that is leading it ahead of others? And geographically, where would you say they're based globally?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say your pension funds, institutional investors are definitely more hot on this. If you're looking at a private wealth investor, they might not be as interested, but it depends on where they come from. It also depends on geography. Someone in the US, I mean, we all know, hopefully all know about the backlash that's going on in the US around ESG. Partly why I've also, my title changed from ESG to sustainable investing, just because of the political landscape around ESG in the US.
Can you just expand on that for people who don't know?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'm no expert, but basically there's an anti-ESG movement in the US where people believe that focusing on ESG is at the expense of financial return, or they believe that you're prioritizing corporate ideals over financial return. And this varies between states. So some states, I know I don't want to get into political debate, but hopefully you can interpret for yourself which states those are. But they're actually passing bills at the moment that sort of dictate that pension funds can't invest in ESG focused funds and things like that. So there's a lot going on at the moment, and it's been really hard for anyone that has a big presence in the US trying to fight these battles. So so I think it's comes down to also just another really big challenge that we have. You're talking about investors. Do they have are they some more focused on others? I think there's a huge knowledge gap between investors and their managers, in the sense that a lot of investors ask for things and I don't think they realize what they're asking for and don't understand what they're asking for. And again, have a maybe preconceived idea of what ESG is, because at the end of the day, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in the space, and I spent a lot of time at IPD, searching for that green premium, the green alpha, and a lot of people are still obsessed with it to this day. And it drives me mad, because I actually just think we've so far beyond that. Also, there's enough evidence that speaks for itself, but we've moved on from that. It's actually just about value protection now and risk protection. I think it's just that any property that doesn't meet a certain threshold or criteria at some point will just get a brown discount. They'll just be sort of become stranded. And that's our job as an asset manager. You have a fiduciary duty to make sure that these assets are fit for the future and protected. And I think, so it's quite tricky sometimes. It depends, trying to educate investors sometimes about why we're doing the things that we're doing, and that's not just specific to us. I think in the market in general, you do get different types of investors, but it is hard sometimes when you're asked for things and there's little, reason as to why they're asking, and you can see that it's not necessarily a well-educated question.
This leads us nicely onto the challenges part. What are the challenges that you're seeing in the market at the moment, and maybe your peers they're having to deal with as well?
I mean, how long do we have? So I've touched on the sort of that knowledge gap, and that doesn't just extend just to investors. There's still a knowledge gap internally, I would say across the whole market. I think a lot of people have, and I mean, I've been really impressed at how many people this isn't their main job. I mean, I work with amazing fund managers who've completely taken it upon themselves to understand this, they are so passionate about it, they are integrating it in their funds. But I also am aware that I've worked in the past with other people where there's just this reliance on ESG people still. And I can say that wholeheartedly, even now, there's a reliance on ESG people. We've become compliance managers, we've become D&I people, we've become social impact people. The ESG has broadened so much, so quickly, it's overwhelming. And I know a lot of my peers have actually lost a lot of the joy and passion associated with ESG, just because there's so little time for innovation and purpose anymore. It's just reporting and compliance and, just trying to make sure that we're not accused of greenwashing, which is another challenge. Fear of greenwashing, but then now there's a new movement of green hushing where people aren't saying like shouting enough about what they're doing in fear of being accused of greenwashing. Exactly. And then there's also squashing, which is when you over egg your social credentials. So yeah, the reliance on ESG people, there's lack of data, which has been a problem since the dawn of ESG. It still remains a problem, but I do think it's getting better. And personally, I feel like there are ways to kind of build on that now. So I don't like to focus on that too much, because I also think that it's been talked about at length, and you can still get on and do things without data. Regulation that hasn't been built for real estate, that we have to interpret and apply to real estate, and it's not a one size fits all approach. And then also lack of policy, so the government not putting in sort of meaningful levers that actually enable like more collection of data. So like us having access to tenant data, that should be mandated. So there's really like an endless list of challenges, but none that can't be overcome in time. And I feel like you just have to keep going. Maybe that's one thing that also I should look for, and when I'm hiring people, is just really like stubborn, like people that persevere, because you do have to be quite headstrong to
I was going to say, you've got to be really passionate to be able to navigate all of those different challenges and push through, make the changes, innovate, drive things forward, and set the boundaries. There's a lot of headwinds that you're going to have to deal with. I guess the flip side to the challenges, what are the positives and what are the good things, and what are the benefits of kind of this adoption and kind of collective interest and need to drive it forward? Like what are you excited about right now?
What am I excited about? So things I love about my job. One is I work with everyone across the business, whether they're in finance, marketing. I work a lot with marketing, sales team, the investment teams, the debt teams, literally everybody, which is great. I love collaborating with them. I love understanding like people and like how, you have to sort of work with people differently. You have to figure out your own relationship with them. I love the relationship building side. I love working with our investors. I love speaking to them. I love understanding what it is that they are looking for, and taking that back and trying to solve the problem for them so that we can support them better. I love communicating, so I love speaking at things and sharing knowledge. Again, meeting people. We're working on some really exciting projects around natural capital at the moment, which like nature and biodiversity, that really excites me at the minute. Side note, nature and biodiversity have been living in the shadow of decarbonisation for a really long time. And as I suppose a key theme this year has been that actually we need nature. We need to reverse the decline in nature in order to actually achieve our decarbonisation goals, because you actually can't do one without the other. They're twin crises. And so, just working a lot more in that space has been really exciting, and understanding that even outside real estate, there's industries that can support real estate, like regenerative farming and like timber, and, actually everything's interlinked, like how these other asset classes are going to have to collaborate and support one another in terms of achieving these goals is really exciting. The other thing I love about ESG is that it's not a competitive space. So I've always said this, and I'm sure my colleagues will disagree, but I firmly believe that ESG shouldn't be used as like a competitive advantage. It's something that we should do together. It's collaborative. It's, we should be supporting one another. It's the only way that we're ever going to make progress, is if we do this together, if we share our experiences, if we shared what we've learned. And I'm part of an amazing network of people where we do that, where we support one another. We share what's worked, what hasn't, because it's the only way we're going to get there.
I guess this is the very crux and heart of ESG, is that collaboration and sending the lift back down and making it easier for someone else to implement and learn, especially with it being quite fragmented and relatively new as well. We touched early on in our conversation the different roles within ESG, and I know you just mentioned it's probably quite a tight job description, but suddenly it's broadened out quite a lot.
Yeah.
Can you just paint a bit of a picture of how you see the different roles and types of opportunities that fit under sustainable investing or ESG?
Sure. So I think I suppose how it's progressed is that you would, in the past, you might have always had an ESG person who looked at everything. They were all encompassing, all singing, all dancing, and now it's broadened. I'm still part of like a smaller asset manager, but what I have seen across the market is at some of the larger, some of our larger asset managers, is that you would have more sort of niche roles based on different themes within ESG. So you might have like a net zero carbon lead, you might have a social or community like focused person, you would have a nature and biodiversity person. So you might be given a lane in ESG, if that makes sense. That might be, I suppose that's for organizations that are much larger and probably more advanced. I would say there's still a big part of the market which are still looking just for the all singing, all dancing strategic ESG people, which I'm definitely one of those like jack of all trades. I know a lot about like lots of different things, but
you've had to, right? You've been at the dawn of defining and building it, and you've kind of you've had the tenure to be able to touch on all those different areas. Yes,
although I'd say now what's so hard is that I know so much less about like I don't have capacity to get in the weeds anymore on, there's just too many themes to go into. So I meet these amazing people. We have an amazing natural capital partner, and he'll talk about like the different types of trees and this and that. And I'm just like, wow. And I'm learning so much from him. But you realize that now people are specializing in these individual areas, which is fantastic. But I guess there still is a need, I guess, for someone like me to kind of bring that together, just to have the thematic and the vision and the strategy. But it's really hard to be in the weeds on everything. It's just not possible anymore. And another area that people are also looking to hire in is just like ESG compliance and regulatory people, because that's become so big and we're not lawyers, and actually trying to get someone to actually just own that and say, okay, we'll do all the compliance, all the reporting. It's really tricky. My dream is that my role doesn't even exist anymore. And like these roles don't exist in that it's so fully integrated and just into how everyone does their job. Because that should ultimately really be the goal, is that, whether you're, an asset manager in a value add fund, a core fund, in a debt team, whether you're in marketing, whether you are CEO, this should just be part of your job. This should just be, whether you're a property manager, whether you're a lawyer and you're doing leases, let's stop talking about green leases. Let's just have a lease that's like modern day. That's just, best practice. Let's just develop properties that don't use certain materials, that just focus on these things. So I think this is probably a pipe dream, but I think that would be the goal, is that it's so integrated that there's no need for these like individual ESG siloed people. Yeah.
Talk to me about what you look for when you do hire, because you've obviously assembled a team in the UK, but also globally as well. What are some of the learnings that you've had on that, and what do you look for when you hire talent?
I think number one is someone like with really good people skills. So being able to build relationships, because you do have to win a lot of people over. So that's a really big one, is communication. So can you, not just internally, but can you communicate this to our investors? Could I see you sitting down, having a good conversation about, what's happening? Do you have that sort of level of presenting confidence? Because you do. It is sometimes tough, and you have to often win people over. You have to seek approval a lot. So you need to, have that. You also need to be quite tough, to be able to sort of keep going. So someone with good patience, like perseverance, because sometimes these things take a long time. You need to be patient. So I guess those are like my fundamentals, is good people skills, and then ultimately like a strong understanding just of the technical side of ESG. So I've had so many interviews, and I can gather quite quickly whether someone has the expertise required just based on what they're talking about. So you'd be able to tell quite quickly, because a lot of the time I've been able to say, okay, you haven't once mentioned GRESB, for example, or you haven't, I'm not going to talk about that, but or just words that I know I need to hear in an interview, and I'll know if you've got the right sort of technical experience, and I'll sort of push into those areas to know, like, what do you find are the challenges, and if it's sort of aligned, then I know, okay, great.
What are those areas? Just
sure.
Just as kind of like sound bites almost for someone to go, oh, I haven't heard that before, but those 4 or 5 different things, I'll go and do some research and become a little bit more aware of. What do you need to hear?
So I need to hear that you've worked with, like, internally, like asset management teams, property management teams. I want to know, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be that transparent, but it depends on, like, the experience you've had. If you've just sat in a sort of, I'm trying to think, on the corporate side, for example, you've done CSR and things, it doesn't necessarily transpire to actually managing, like, tangible assets and working with asset managers, fund managers, things like that. And if you've worked at, like, if you've had, like, a very energy focused background, and you've done a lot of that, that's great. But I need the whole picture sometimes. It depends what you're hiring for. You might want an engineer that's got, like, net zero carbon audits under their belt. That's great. But in the roles that I've hired for, if you want that all singing, all dancing, like, you need someone that's going to talk about decarbonisation, nature and biodiversity, talk about GRESB and benchmarking and data, and how have you gathered that data from your tenants? How have you engaged with them? Like, what have you done to kind of, talk with your tenants? How would you overcome not having data? What would you do? What estimates would you use? Like, where would you go to find them? What industry organisations, like, have you worked with in the past? Have you worked with Better Buildings Partnership, UK Green Building Council? Like, what's your network like? All those things are quite important, because depending on what you need the person to do. Yeah,
I was going to say, because there's not a shortage, but there's a growing populace of real estate investment management and real estate professionals who are taking on more ESG and sustainability focused roles. But I'd say demand definitely outstrips the supply of them. Depending on, obviously, the level that you're recruiting, their understanding of all the different topics you've just mentioned will need to vary. But surely you've got to look at other sectors and other industries to kind of attract that talent into real estate. And they're not going to know everything, or they won't have been an asset manager or a property manager. Yeah. And I know real estate isn't rocket science, but it can be quite complex, breaking it all down. How? I
mean, I'm one who has transferred from real estate, so I totally agree.
Well, outside of real estate. Yeah. But how do you go from outside of real estate into real estate if you are...
If I'm looking for a real estate person, like, how do you
do that?
So, I mean, one, I think there's a shortage, not just within real estate, I think everywhere. So I think that's even hard. I've actually just hired an engineer in my team, and she's great. And she didn't necessarily come from a real estate background at all. She did a little bit before she joined us. But that's what I liked about her. And also, she just shows so much potential in terms of, she just gets things, she picks them up, and I knew it immediately. I actually mentored her before hiring her. So I think, again, she got involved in networks, she took initiative, and that's, I would really recommend to anyone who's, trying to get into the real estate space, or just, looking for jobs in real estate, or trying to move asset classes. I've reached out, even at one point, I was like, I actually think I want to go work in retail. I reached out on LinkedIn to heads of sustainability at Chanel and at luxury brands, just because I'm interested to know what is their role like. Is that something I'd want to do in the future? I don't know. I think it's really important to take that initiative and to reach out to people, grow your network 100%, try find a mentor. That's hugely important, because I think it's a lot about, like, who you know, and just being able to grow that understanding and educate yourself in terms of what's happening outside of your little bubble.
I guess it's having the behavioural attributes, like, inherently, as well as the interest in ESG and sustainability more broadly, that combining the two will enable you to excel within a real estate seat as well, and having the confidence when you're hiring for that person.
Definitely, 100%. I think it's definitely a behaviour, like, as a personality thing. I think you do. And if I look at, like, everyone in the ESG space, I think we're all cut from a certain cloth to some extent, in that we will push, and we're, drivers, and we're passionate. It's a very passionate group of people. I think we have to be. Otherwise, we probably would have stopped doing it a long time ago.
As we kind of look ahead, what are you most excited about? And for the next 6, 12, 18 months? Like, what are you most excited about seeing?
So I've banged on about this a lot, sorry, but I'm really excited about nature and biodiversity at the moment. I think it's a huge area that everyone's looking at the moment, both from a sort of investment point of view, so investing in, those alternative asset classes, but then also how can nature and biodiversity support what we're doing in real estate from a decarbonisation point of view. So, offsetting, as much as a lot of people don't want to think about it, but offsetting will play a part in our net zero carbon journeys, whether we like it or not. There's going to be residual emissions that we have to offset, and so we want to do that in a responsible, well thought out way. And I think people are starting to think about that now, and everyone's looking at nature-based solutions and how can that support it. So I'm really excited about that. What else am I excited about? I'm excited about collaboration. Everyone seems to be talking about it a lot at the moment, and there's a lot going on in the industry and just a lot of sharing and progress that is being made. I just feel like, sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, I still can't believe that we're dealing with these same problems. But then when I stop and look at like how much has changed since I started and how my role's changed, I'm like, wow, like there's been a lot of progress. So we just need to keep going and, just keep going.
Two questions. Where can someone, how can someone get involved with any of those networking events, or where can they find them, or kind of throw their hat into the ring? And then secondly, what courses or studies do you think, or do you recommend people doing if they've got an interest and they actually want to pursue it a little bit more further from an academic, but also a career perspective?
Sure. So, I personally haven't done any, so I can't personally vouch, but I know, so someone in my team previously had done the Cambridge Sustainability Institute course, which she did her master's through them, I think, and raved about it. There's also the CFA ESG certification, which I've heard really good things about, and it's not like hugely onerous. I think you have 6 months to do it, and I think some of my colleagues did it in sort of 2 to 3 months. There's so many. I would also just say, if it's like internal corporate stuff, Heelbreak's a really good organization for training. In terms of getting involved in networks and industry, I would just say start looking at organizations like Better Buildings Partnership UK, GBC, ARIF, the Association of Real Estate Funds. I sit on their ESG and Impact Committee. They do loads of interesting things, and sometimes it's open to non-members. At BBP, sometimes it's at a get onto LinkedIn, connect with people. That's the biggest thing I would say, is find people, connect. Don't just send a connect invite. Give a good background as to why you're connecting. Say hi, because I get bombarded with requests from people on LinkedIn. I have no idea who they are. I can see we may have one mutual connection, but I don't know why they're connecting, and I actually just ignore them because I'm like, I'm not going to include you in my network unless I know who you are. But for those people that have connected saying, I heard you speak at this event, or, I actually mentor a girl now because she found me on LinkedIn and she reached out to me and sort of said, look, I'm in this role. I really appreciate mentorship. Could we just have and I did, and I still mentor her, and I've brought her along to so many networking things. So take initiative, reach out to people, but communicate, because I don't have a lot of time. My time is very precious. And so don't, that cold sort of connection doesn't do it for me. I
feel like you've opened yourself up for an influx of messages on LinkedIn now.
But give the background.
Give the background if you want to get in touch with Jess to talk all things sustainable investing and ESG. Jess, as we draw to a close, a question that I ask everyone on the podcast is, if I was to give you £500 million of equity, who are the people, what property and which place would you look to deploy that capital? Now, yes, Fiera, yes, your existing team and the existing strategies. But if I take you out of that, how would you approach that question, and where would you look to deploy that capital?
I don't think it's any surprise, based on what we've talked about, that I'm probably going to invest in natural capital to support a real estate decarbonisation pathway. I'd invest it in afforestation or reforestation, peatland or soil carbon sequestration, so regenerative farming, agroforestry. I would do it anywhere in the UK only, because locally based. And I would do it, who would I get to do it? I would definitely get Savills to do it for me. They've got an amazing natural capital team. In terms of other asset managers that are rocking it in this space, Gresham House is got really good natural capital. I actually spoke on a panel with them the other day. I know that Homies Federated are doing a lot on nature and biodiversity. But yeah, there's loads of people doing awesome stuff in the space, but I'd definitely get Sevils to do it for me.
Shouting out your competitors, I think that's the first on the podcast, but I guess it hits at the heart of, as you've said, collaboration and sharing and enabling people to get a foot up and lead with best practice. Well, look, Jess, fascinating conversation. I think we could talk for hours on this. I've learned a hell of a lot, and I'm really excited to see what you and the team go on to do. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
No worries.
Today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Subscribe, give us a rating, like or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests we should get on the podcast or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit experienced talent for investors, owners, developers, and operators. So if you're considering your career options at the moment or looking to attract top talent to work for you, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you can find a wealth of research to aid your search. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next time.